Peace, peace, my peaceful people. What's good? It's your brother, man. And we back. All right. And, we come to do what we do. You know what I'm saying? Get these oracle lectures in our head. All right. I just woke up, y'all. Leave me alone. All right. Here we go. All right. We are at Hexagram 20, Contemplation. Okay. I'm sitting there debating on whether or not I want to use my old man's. I don't want to use my old man's, but my eyes are doing a funny thing today, so I'm not sure. I might as well, just because, I need to be clear. Had a clarity going on. It's the best policy. All right. All right, folks, here we go. So, Hexagram 20, we are reading from the I Ching Transcripts, RUNA Hexagram, I Ching Transcripts, right? Let's transcript this series of lectures on the I Ching, right? Prime information on the I Ching, I will hold it up there with everything sage-like from way back in the days up to now. Man with a ton of experience doing I Ching readings and watching them play out over people's lifetimes, So this is I can point to no one who has as much experience doing readings for people over the last 50 years or so than this guy. So this is these are his words and his work. So I'm just a student, disciple of wisdom. So here we go. All right. So Hexagram 20, Kuan, Contemplation, View. Above the gentle wind, below the receptive earth. Contemplation or point of view depends on your receptivity, kun, and the effectiveness of thought to impress upon you. Your thought situation, your sebek situation, your sebek nature, your mercurial nature will affect or distort or put in harmony your point of view, your perception. Oftentimes, people come into a situation from a predetermined point of view. Sebek has closed the door to you seeing what is there. Your mind, you make your mind up. A husband should function a certain way. A wife should function a certain way. Relationship is about so-and-so. That is your point of view. If your ideas are about something if your ideas about something does not jive with the actual reality, Sebek has closed the door to you. For y'all who don't know, Sebek is the Egyptian Kemetic deity that governs the intellect. It governs everything that's going on in the mind, mental, your thought, your mentality, right? The mercurial factor, right? Your communicative ability, things like that. That's all Sebek. So he's talking about the Sebek within you, right? Because the deities are as above, so below, right? The deities out there in the universe are right here in our spirit. So when you see the deity Sebek on the walls, right? The ancients were communicating to you something that's within you. So pay attention. All right. Sebek has closed the door to you seeing what is there. Your mind is made up. All right, we did that. Okay, Sebek has closed the way for you. Your ideas will not lead to that place, that destiny where you want to go, right? Meaning looks like the understanding that you need to arrive at and the proper action, which is your destiny. Just so you guys know, I'm reading from a text that is very small, it's jumbled, and it's cut off at certain points. So I have to kind of do on-the-spot edits sometime to get this right. Okay, so here we go. All right, that's all my disclaimers. We out. All right, so a sequence of actions is what your destiny is all about. Whether they are correct or incorrect, where you are going, what action you take depends on ideas. This is what Sun is all about. The 20th hexagram has to do with your receptivity on one hand and your Sebek nature. The two of them are very much kin to each other. Perhaps sometime in the future we can sit down and delve into the inner dynamics of the structure of the I Ching. I tried that once several years ago. I'm still singeing from it. I tried to teach a class and the class got crazy. Folks began to create all kinds of correspondences that weren't there. But those of you who want to try it hands-on, all hexagrams whose first bottom line is yin correspond to the parasympathetic, and all hexagrams whose first bottom line is yang correspond to the sympathetic. Have fun. All right? Yeah, he's talking about, the all hexagrams that are yin hexagrams, and you can tell it's a yin hexagram from the bottom line being open, right? Or parasympathetic, right? And opposite for yang hexagrams. All the yang hexagrams will be having a straight line towards the bottom, right? Dealing with the sympathetic. So have fun, right? Okay, the text. A slight variation of tonal stress gives the Chinese name for this hexagram a double meaning. It means both contemplating and being seen, in the sense of being an example. These ideas are suggested by the fact that the hexagram can be understood as picturing a type of tower characteristic of ancient China. Check it. When you stand on a tower, you can see for a very long distance, but you can also be seen. That must always be kept in mind. But then there are things in the judgment, in the image, and in the lines that go beyond even this. So be on your guard. It's a tough little hexagram. Back to the text. A tower is a kind of commanded wide view of the country. At the same time, when situated on a mountain, it became a landmark so that it could be seen for miles around. Thus, the hexagram shows a ruler who contemplates the law of heaven above him and the ways of the people below, and who, by means of good government, sets aloft the example to the masses, to shepherd. This is a very subtle and beautiful message here, that don't forget that in viewing others, others are viewing you. People forget that. I have always watched people who pass judgment on other people and pass criticism on other people, and they forget that they are also being viewed. The mere fact that you can view somebody means that you can be viewed. The mere fact that you are viewing somebody else means that that they are viewing you. Yeah, so he's speaking, just to let you know. Sometimes things are repetitive because people kind of speak like that. It has nothing to do, per se, with the ruler, that particular information there. Yes, there is one good example of it. The ruler is the most visible, but that will restrict the meaning of the hexagram and the value to every one of you. Because it is also a message to all of us. Yes, the greater your position, the greater your example will be. Right? The more you should view, and the more you will be viewed. Okay. But the message to all of us is that you are constantly viewing people and making judgments in your mind about the situation of people. Don't forget that just because you can see them, they can see you. You are being viewed also. Actually, it is not a dual meaning, it's a two-way street. That's what it should say. Okay. Judgment, back to the text, the judgment. Contemplation. Ablution has been made, but not yet the offering. Full of trust, they look up to him. The sacrificial ritual in China began with an ablution and a libation by which the deity was invoked, after which the sacrifice was offered. Back to Shechem. Here, reference to the ancient black China, to ancient black China is being made. Ablution and libation being poured. So what is this doing in this hexagram? Receptivity, the kun part of this hexagram, meaning contemplation. Part of your contemplation view goes beyond simply looking at something. From a kun point of view, it has to do with going into dhyana, going into meditation state to look at something. So before you go into meditation, you always pour libation to the ancestors and the deities, ablution and cleansing. You purify yourself and you pour libation so that when you go think about something, you'll get assistance from the deities and the ancestors. So you do not just try to look at something with your own brain. This is a great message here. Because most people, when they try to see something, they only go in with the assistance of their own brain, right? So he said, this goes back to ancient Black China, right? He's talking about, this is the culture of Chinese, of our ancestors. The culture of our ancestors is to venerate the ancestors, to acknowledge the ancestors, to bring them into what we're doing so that we can have a greater insight or reveal or convey a greater insight, etc. Right? So this is how we start, what we do, pour libation. Right? The moment back to the text. The moment of time between two ceremonies is the most sacred of all, meaning the moment between the purification and the libation and the invocation of the deity. The sacrifice is that which you give up, that worthless thing, that low thing that you are in love with in your life. That is what you are in between. You are in between the form of the ritual and the actual minabenoken ma'at of the deity. Minabenoken ma'at, living the truth of the deity, right? Living the truth of the life of the deity, right? Or living how the deity lives, right? The minabenoken ma'at is basically living how the deity lives. Just to understand, if you're doing a ritual to a particular deity, you must, walk and talk as that deity would, right? You must do things as that deity would, make observations, make communications, take actions as the deity would. That is the way that you invoke that deity. That is the way that deity, comes and bestows favor upon you when it sees itself in you, right? Okay. Back to the text. Back to Sheh. Here we came into a hexagram that sounded on the surface very familiar, and we find ourselves with the tail by the tiger, with a tiger by the tail. The issue is very deep. Let's get more into intricate ourselves. Intricate. Let's get more into it to extricate ourselves from it. All right. And I put the sacrifice as, a main point. Right, okay, back to the text. The moment of time between two ceremonies is the most sacred of all. The moment of the deepest inner concentration. If piety is sincere and expressive of real faith, the contemplation of it has a transforming and awe-inspiring effect on those who witness it. Thus also, in nature, a holy seriousness is to be seen in the fact that natural occurrences are uniformly subject to the law. Contemplation of the divine, meaning underlying the workings of the universe, gives to the man who is called upon to influence others the means of producing like effects. This requires that inner power, inner concentration, which religious contemplation develops in great men of strong faith. It enables them to apprehend the mysterious and divine laws of life, and by means of the profoundest inner concentration, they give expression to the laws, or to these laws, in their own purpose, in their own persons. Thus, a hidden spiritual power emanates from them, influencing and dominating others without their being aware of how it happens. All right, let me run that back. It's very important, right? We're talking the text, right? It says, the moment of time between the ceremonies is the most sacred of all, the moment of deepest inner concentration. If piety is sincere and expressive of real faith, a contemplation of it has a transforming and awe-inspiring effect on those who witness it. Thus, also in nature, a holy seriousness is to be seen in the fact that natural occurrences are uniformly subject to law. Contemplation of the divine, meaning underlying workings of the universe, gives to the man who is called upon to influence others the means of producing like effects. That's kind of like what I just said. It's very much like what I just said. This requires the power. He's talking about, you contemplating the way of the deity, right? The way of the divine, and it giving you a power to produce the like effects. Right? This requires that power of inner concentration, which religious contemplation develops in great men, strong in faith. It enables them to apprehend the mysterious and divine laws of life, and by means of the profoundest inner concentration, they give expression to these laws in their own persons. Thus, a hidden spiritual power emanates from them, influencing and dominating others without their being aware of how it happens. That's deep. Back to Shechem. That is the soon part of it, that hidden influence that comes out without you being aware of it. But let's backtrack, because somehow they started out on one foot, and before you know it, they went into somewhere else. What the hexagram is revealing to you is the profundity of what we take for granted. Most people take knowing for granted, meaning as you think about it, something, and I include that I know, meaning as soon as I think about something, I conclude that I know. People sit down and think about something and conclude that they have thought. The oracle in this particular reading is saying the thinking about something to arrive at a proper understanding of it is a very deep process, much deeper than most people can go, know how to go, etc. In essence, when you get this hexagram, the oracle is telling you you need to think very deeply and profoundly about the issue, and that the way you do it is to take your spiritual bath, put on some clean white clothing, pour a libation to the ancestors and the deities, sit down and go into trance, into dhyana. Go into that inner meditative place where your spirit can comprehend and contemplate the laws governing life, and now you're thinking about that matter will be guided by those laws that govern things. If you want to gain insight, if you want to know something, you have to go beyond those conditioned ideas about the matter that you are thinking about. And that will not happen as long as you stay in this external center state of consciousness that you are now in. You have to transcend that external focus, consciousness, dharana, into inner contemplative state of inner trance. Deep stuff. This is real, man. This is real. If we could, latch hold to this stuff in everything we do, we'd be supermen and women. This is good stuff. But you have to purify yourself and pour libations so that you go in, you don't go out. So you go in, you don't go out through one of the lower 14 psychic centers and enter into a plane of the lower spirits and get fooled. Right? Talking about the 14 chakras, not just the 7. Right? Because it is not enough to just go into trance and possess. It is what spiritual level you go into trance with. That is an important thing. It is not enough to contact an ancestor or deity. Through what psychic center do you contact that ancestor? Do you contact that deity? That is the important thing. That is the purification. Here the rules on how to think correctly about something is given out. The oracle is saying sitting down to think about something is a ritual. If you go and you ask God to forgive me or whatever, and I am really pious and spiritually educated, I will take a bath and put on white clothes and go and buy offerings to the deity, burn some incense, etc. I do a ritual, that's fine. But if I want to gain insight into how I'm going to relate better with my mate, I sit down with dirty clothes, dirty body, probably in a subway somewhere or in a park with guys smoking marijuana around me, playing disco music, sitting down, thinking about how we are going to get our relationship together. The Oracle is saying you cannot arrive at proper contemplation. You have to go to the highest power up on the mountain, symbol of deep meditation. The mountain is a symbol of meditation because it is the height of the spirit, because mountains are cold. And when you meditate, your body becomes cold because your breathing rate slows down. When you go into samadhi, your breathing rate stops for a few fractions of a second, etc. That's what the tower on the mountain is symbolic of. Anything that is important, any conclusion that is important, any subject matter that is important, just do not casually in the way that you have accustomed to sit down and think about it. A Jewish man once picked up the Nefer and said, "You must read a lot." I said, "No, I read a little and meditate a lot on the little that I read." And that is the truth. I don't read as much as most writers read. Thank God for that. But I get a lot of mileage out of the little that I read because I go into the inner planes on the spirit that takes the world and turns it upside down and sideways to see and take a look at the work. Look at it this way and that way and that way, right? And they showed me all kinds of things with one word. So why read books and books when it takes so much time to get through one word? That's what we are talking about. Deep stuff. So it's about meditating on what you read to gain the insight, the deep insight. As a matter of fact, back in 1972, when I was one, when I was going through the great spiritual revolution that I went through, that took me out of the other world into this world here, I had a lot of books. I'm not saying that reading is bad. I read a lot of books back then, up until 1972, until the voice began to tell me constantly. I would go into trance and the voice would ask me, "When will you tire from reading and begin to listen to that voice that speaks to you from within?" What I'm saying is that you have something important to think about, and you think about it in an external state of being. You think about it in dirty clothes. You think about it in a dirty place you don't understand. If you are going to make love to your old man or your old woman, you go take a shower, you put on the juju love incense, and you put on red something. There's a hole, punched hole in there. You put on and you want a proper ambiance, red lights. He said put on red lights and you want a proper ambiance. But when you go think about something, it has to be the same way. Got to do the proper ambiance. That's deep stuff, man. This stuff, man, like this is why I read this, man, because, this is why I'm reading this to you, because this is, if we could, latch hold to these ritualistic ways, we will, do something to, combat the ignorance that we see daily. Life is full of all kinds of whack stuff out here. And these are the ancient ways, man. You know what I mean? So this is a beautiful work here. All right. Check, I'm still talking. Another thing, too, the Oracle says this is the point between the purification bath, the ablution, and the pouring of libation. This is between that and the actual invocation of the God. Meaning that first you purify yourself. It is a ritual you are going to do. Let's say that you want to go and ask Heru, or Sebek, or Ser to help you with something. there must be a period of contemplation between the purification and the libation and the actual invocation of the deity. And that is for you to sit down and really go into dhyana, zazen breathing, or chant a particular mantra and go into dhyana and think deeply about that truth that you must live. That's deep. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to do an Osir ritual and not live the truth, or not live the truth of Osir. You know, you're not going to do a ritual to the deity and then, you know, go just be willy-nilly in your person, you know, live in the way that we live out here. No, you're not going to do that and invoke that deity successfully. That's what's being spoken about. Think deeply about that lower thing that you must give up before you invoke the deity. It is interesting that the real meaning of this hexagram is unseen. Question: would it be good to check with the oracles about what you are going to give up? Answer: yes. It is always good to check with the oracles and check on that which you must give up. That's real stuff. Like, we don't, at intervals, at certain intervals, you know, whether it be monthly, whether it be yearly, you know, your birthday, right? You should ask the oracle, how does it see me, right? How do you see me? How do you see my progress? How am I going about this life? How do I look in heaven? How do I look from heaven? You know, ask that to the oracles and let the oracles tell you what you got to work on. Then you get a clearer view of where you are. You know, and this is just about accepting truth. You know, this is, you know, when you are real enough with yourself in this world, you humble yourself and you say, hey, what am I doing, God? Tell me, because I want to know. All right. The image, the wind blowing over the earth, the image of contemplation. There is another mnemonic to help you remember the hexagram. Wind is sun. Earth is kun. Wind blowing over the earth is an image. It helps you to remember the hexagram. Back to the text. Thus the kings of old visited the regions of the world, contemplated the people, and gave them instruction. Check them. This is another example of how the hexagram will work. The text. When the wind blows over the earth, it goes far and wide, and the grass must bend to its power. These are two occurrences. These two occurrences find confirmation in the hexagram. The two images are used to symbolize a practice of the kings of old. In making regular journeys, the ruler could, in the first place, survey his realm and make certain that none of the existing usages of the people escape notice. In the second, he could exert influence through which such customs as were unsuitable could be changed. Check them. This is fine, but to you, this has meaning too. Meaning, when you meditate in the way that is prescribed here, one of the things that happens is that you are able to examine yourself. This period of self-examination is what will keep you up to date on your progress, meaning periodic self-examination. It is not just speaking to the king, but to you. You, as king of your realm, should also examine the state of your kingdom periodically. Now we know where I learned that from. Okay, back to the text. All of this points to the power possess. All of this points to the power possessed by the superior personality. On the one hand, such a man will have a view of the real sentiments of the great mass of humanity and therefore cannot be deceived. On the other hand, he will impress the people so profoundly by his mere existence and by the impact of his personality that they will be swayed by him as the grass by the wind. Back to Shechem. Meaning that, boy, oh boy, I need some water, y'all. But I don't have any anywhere near, so I'm going to work it out, right? Okay, meaning when you think about the things in your life in a state of meditation, you will get a real insight into the emotions that are motivating you. When you are into dharana, your emotions tend to be glossed over. In the dharana state, in the externalized state, you tend to gloss over and make light of many of your thoughts because you are not very deeply in touch with the emotional core of your being. When you go into meditation, then you get an unbiased and very clear view of your emotional state. And also, because of the internalized state, you can then also make a strong impression upon your spirit to change those conditions that need to be changed. It is unfortunate that a spiritual message will be given basically in terms of an example of how a king keeps up his realm. It would have been better if the spiritual example would have been given and then an aside to what the king could or should do. Right. Now he got his surgical blade on the situation. All right. The lines. Back to the text. 6 in the beginning. First line, right? Boy-like contemplation. For an inferior man, no blame. For a superior man, humiliation. This means contemplation from a distance, without comprehension. A man of influence is at hand, but his influence is not understood by the common people. This matters little in the case of the masses, for they benefit by the actions of the ruling sage, whether they understand them or not. But for the superior man, it is a disgrace. He must not content himself with a shallow, thoughtless view of the prevailing forces. He must contemplate them as a connected whole and try to understand them. This is deep stuff, man. I love this stuff. Back to the text. There are two meanings here. There is at work something that is sage-like. A man of influence is at hand, a sage or great man, or a great power is at hand beyond your comprehension. The oracle says whether you comprehend this influence, this man or whatever, whether you understand the way he works or the way he works or the way he works will benefit. That's worded weirdly. Whether you understand the way he works or the way he, doesn't work, will benefit you, or you will benefit from it. All right. Whether you understand the way he works or the way he doesn't work, you will benefit from it. See, I'm editing, y'all. I'm swift. I did my Sebek meditations. All right, so this is very important because a lot of people tie themselves into knots. They say, I cannot do anything unless I comprehend it, without stopping to realize that there are many things that will always be beyond your comprehension until you become a sage yourself. And I warn those of you who have that attitude, who must understand something in order to do it. You must give up this habit. All right, I'll be back. All right. Because unless you are self-realized, being there are a lot of things that you need to do, that comprehension will come only after you have done it. And that requires some time. So when you get this line, whenever it is that you are involved in, or whatever it is that you are involved with, if you don't understand it, go ahead and do it. Right? Saying do it whether or not you understand it. But the oracles says, if you are an inferior man, you may not make any further effort to understand it. But if you are a superior man, this will be humiliating. Meaning, as a superior man, even though you must go ahead and do it, even though you don't understand it, you must make the effort to try in some time to understand it. The superior influence could be a sage or could be the working of a superior forces within your being, the deities, spiritual culture, the supreme being within your spirit, etc. Because some people say, I don't understand spiritual culture, so therefore I will not do it. I don't understand how the oracles function, so I will not abide by it. I will not use it, etc. Know what I mean? Line 2, back to the text. 6 in the second place. Contemplation of the crack of the door, furthering the perseverance of a woman. Read that back. Contemplation through the crack of the door. See what I'm saying? Right? Furthering the perseverance of a woman. This is a line that gives us the 34th hexagram. Seeing something through the crack of the door, it blocks out larger vision. So since you can't see the issue at hand, then you make up your own ideas. Y'all remember Three's Company, Mr. Furley? Mr. Furley be like this. At the door, you know me, and he always get it messed up. That's what we talking about, Mr. Furley. This is Mr. Furley line here. And of course, if it is not true, the only way that you are going to get it across is through force. And the miniature the miniature view that you have of your environment looking through the cracked door is also reflected upon your view of your person. Hence the bravado of the 34th hexagram that tries to salvage its ego by expanding, by being yang, and so forth. Don't forget that when hexagrams are complementaries, they become opposite of each other in terms of trigrams. I wanted you to see the analogy that one is in the second line and the fifth line of the other. I wanted you to see the analogy that one is in the second line and in the fifth line of the other. Okay. So I guess he's saying that those are similar in terms of that. Let me shut up. I'm not sure if that's what he's saying. All right. Back to the text. Through the crack of the door, one has a limited outlook. One's outlook outward from within. Or one's look outward from within. Contemplation is subjectively limited. One tends to relate everything to oneself, and one cannot put oneself in another's place and understand his motives. This is appropriate for a good housewife. Back to Shechem. This is a bit of Chinese chauvinism that we can discard. Back to the text. It is not necessary for her to be conversant with the affairs of the world, but for a man who must take active part in public life, such a narrow, egotistic view of contemplating things is, of course, harmful. Back to Shechem. What the sage meant to say here is not meant for all men at all times. At any given time, to cultivate an expanded perception of life, meaning that eventually all men must, but not every man will, period. There is a demand that every man at a given time to do this, but eventually he will have to. There is not demand that every man at a given time do this, but eventually he will have to. The example was in terms of Chinese chauvinism. The image of looking through the cracked door, which restricts your field of view, limits your perception, but the limitation is not really you looking out through some external obstruction. It says contemplation is subjectively limited. One tends to relate everything to oneself, meaning what is limiting you is that you are going through life thinking only of how things affect you. This is devastating because almost every one of you almost always is guilty of that. Almost every Westerner thinks every young person in that society thinks in terms of how something affects his or her person. I want you to really meditate upon that. You go into relationships basically in terms of how it affects you. Somebody has a problem, illness, insanity, whatever, and you think only in terms of you. Your mate has a problem, but you think of how it affects you, hardly ever in terms of how it affects your mate. That is a devastating line. When you get that line, it's time for you to sit down and do some heavy introspection. And don't forget that I said whenever you get a hexagram, it is not enough for you to comprehend the hexagram, which is the fault that I'm screwing up here. Which is the fault that many of you incur. You have to go beyond that and identify how you are manifesting that hexagram. You sit down and you think of all the situations in which you thought about yourself and how is it affecting you. There is another kindred bit of information that relates to this which the author does not give. He should also have said one relates everything in terms of how one's references, in terms of one's own references, one's own ideas about the situation of life itself. For example, from an academic perspective, you believe that evolutionism is a fact. So you approach religion, you approach all subject matter from the evolutionist perspective. You begin to talk about blacks and other non-white races developed from a gorilla. Many good writers, Gerald Massey, for example, his work has been very much marred by having taken on the evolutionist philosophy, which then mars his thinking on the subject. He can no longer see. When you make up your mind with some theory or some conditioned perspective on something, some homegrown notion about something, some personal grown notion about something, instead of educating yourself in the ageless wisdom and going to the oracles and seeking guidance from your ancestors and the deities, then you are looking through the cracked door. As a matter of fact, when you can say, we can say that as a matter of fact, we can say that is all Sebek has given you, right? Because Sebek tricks up the mind. He's the trickster, right? Right? All that Sebek has given you. That is another correspondence that we can add to Sebek. Sometimes he closes the door. Sometimes he allows you to think, to look through a cracked door. There's that hole again. Look through the cracked door. It all amounts to the same thing. It is a Sebekian correspondence. Okay, line 3. Back to the text. 6 in the third place. Contemplation of my life decides the choice between advance and retreat. This is the place of transition. We no longer look outward to receive pictures that are more or less limited and confused, but direct our contemplation upon ourselves in order to find the guidelines for our decisions. This self-contemplation means overcoming naive egotism in the person who sees everything solely from his own standpoint. He begins to reflect on this, and in this way acquires objectivity. However, self-knowledge does not mean preoccupation with one's own thoughts. Rather, it means concerns about the effects one creates. It is only the effects our lives produce that give us the right to judge whether what we have done means progress or regression. Right? I'll read that back. However, self-knowledge does not mean preoccupation with one's own thoughts. Rather, it means concerns about the effects one creates. It is only the effects our lives produce that give us the right to judge whether what we have done means progress or regression. Back to Shekel. Unfortunately, this particular line is very much marred. Here you are consulting the oracle, and the oracle is saying to you, well, you are at a crossroad. Third line, transition. There is a very strong sebek element in this reading because it has to do with seeing. Wherever it has to do with seeing, sebek is there. He is your perception. He is the mind's eye. So you have arrived at the place of transition, the crossroads. Here is a very great lesson on how to perform a sebek ritual. To Elegba, to Ishu. Right? Elegba and Ishu are correspondent. Pardon me. Are correspondences to sebek across on the other side of Africa. Let's see. Pardon me. Right. Okay. Sebek, Elegba, Ishu. Okay. And that is that you have to stop looking at things from the way it affects you. Egotism, separatism, segregativeness. Stop looking at life from the way it affects you. That is the correct part of this reading. It says if you want to solve a situation, don't observe your environment. Don't observe what this person is doing, what this person is doing, what theory of this or that. That is not the solution to the problem. The solution lies within. You must examine your ego, your degree of egotism. You must take a clear, objective look at your person. Once you have stripped yourself of all the fallacies and all vanity, and you see yourself in truth, then that is the foundation of your next actions. But the average person who gets this reading is not capable of looking at the effects one creates, in parentheses. Because that too is going to be subjectively tainted. Objectivity here is the oracles. So if you get this line, as with the 8th hexagram, it should say, inquire of the oracles again. Ask the oracle how it views your person, how it contemplates your person. An open-minded question. Don't ask, am I selfish? Just ask the oracles, how do you view my person? Because if I say, ask the oracle if I'm selfish, some of you might say, I am not selfish. Or question mark, am I not selfish? Okay. And you have trouble with reading. Your sebek gets in the way. So we keep it open. Ask the oracle to describe your person. Good stuff. Question. Is that only for this line? Answer. Yes, for this line. Because in the second line, the oracle is telling you. At the third line, the oracle is telling you. Okay? At the third line, you have arrived to the point where you can perform a ritual to sebek. Okay? Let's say you went to the oracles on a situation and you got this line. Now the ball is in your court. The oracle is saying it is not about the other person or the situation or whatever. It is about you. Now, to really understand the situation, what you need to do, now ask me about yourself. So it's like you're getting this line and the oracle says you need to look at yourself. Ask me about yourself. That's what it's saying. That's what he's saying. He's saying that, when you get this third line, ask the oracles to tell you about yourself. Right? That is what the oracle is saying. The oracle is playing with loaded dice because you are not going to get a reading that is too flattering. If you get this point, you know what your choices are. Somewhere between 4 and 29. 4, the hexagram of immaturity, where you can get the line that says, you're being immature. You know what I'm saying? That's deep. That's deep, man. And I love the way he breaks it down. He's saying, if the oracle is saying, stop, ask me about you, obviously, the oracle is saying that, I got some stuff to tell you about you. That's not too flattering, you know what I mean? And it's real because, yeah, the oracle will tell you. The oracle will tell you when you're being a jerk. The oracle will tell you when you're being a child. The oracle will tell you when you're doing it right. You know what I mean? Yeah. But, but I'm always fascinated at this interaction, though. This is a living interaction. This is not just, I'm taking inanimate objects and I'm manipulating them and they're giving me things and I'm reading them and I'm applying. No, this is saying, contemplate on me. Like, ask, oracle, talk about me, talk to me about me. And it tells you, and you see this stuff. It's like, oh, dag, yeah, I was being kind of immature over there. Yeah, I was being kind of a jerk in that situation. I should have did this. You know what I mean? And that interaction to me is, it always blows my mind how the oracle speaks to you like that. You know what I mean? How, this inanimate object gave you such a poignant understanding of yourself. That's real, that you could see like you was talking to a person, a wise person. You know what I mean? It's evidence of God. People try to say, oh, yeah, there's no God. No, the evidence is right here. The evidence is when you do those readings and then look at the situation and see all the elements in the reading. That's God. You know what I'm saying? That's not something demonic. Don't let them tell you that. Please don't let them tell you that doing readings is demonic. Oh, no. If something can tell me about my development at a particular time in my life, then that's not the devil. Okay? That's God. You know what I mean? Unequivocally. All right? That's God. I don't care. I'll debate anybody on the subject. That's God. All right? If the oracle can tell me that next year I'll have a health problem, so I need to focus here. I need to focus over there. Or I'll have problems with my child if I don't X, Y, Z. If the oracle is telling me that, I need to pay attention to that. That's God talking to my life. That's not some devil. Please mind the intentions of the writers of some of these books that try to control you in a certain way, right? Those people didn't want people who were effective people, right? They didn't want people who could now look at them and, communicate a judgment about what they're doing, right? They didn't want to just be righteous, right? They had other things in mind. They wanted to be something else when they wrote things like, don't believe in the oracles, wherever they wrote that. I don't know if they wrote that or they just talk about it. But the people who are saying that are not people who have your best interest at heart fully. Because if they do, then they'll just be correct and they'll introduce you, let you go ahead and meditate, let you go ahead and do the oracle. They'll say, hey, yeah, do the oracle on me. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm living right. You know what I mean? And the oracle going to communicate that to you. Then you're going to trust me more. You know what I'm saying? They're not going to, steer you away from the oracle. So that's where that comes from. Don't believe it when they tell you don't believe the oracles, man. That's God. You know what I mean? Wonder in the revelation of life that the oracle gives. Wonder. You know what I mean? Sit in wonderment like, whoa, that's deep. All right. Okay, 6 in the 4th place. Back to the text. Contemplation of the light of the kingdom. It furthers one to exert influence as the king, as the guest of the king. This describes a man who understands the secrets by which a kingdom can be made to flourish. Such a man must be given an authoritative position in which he can exert influence. He should be, so to speak, a guest. That is, he should be honored and allowed to act independently, and that should not be used as a tool. Back to Shechem. In your life, this could be the oracles. This could be your king. This could be your priest. And this could be the deity. You have to identify what the oracle is speaking of, right? I'm going to say this too. Like if you're an employer, this is a great line for an employee, right? This is, you get this line. The oracle is telling, yeah, that guy right there, let him in, right? And then give him, he has what you need, so let him do his thing. All right, back to Shechem speaking about the text. All right, you have to identify what the oracle is speaking of. Because when you get this line, what is implied here is that there is a tendency to misuse the light. People go to the oracles to find out information, not to find out commandments for action. Say that again. People go to the oracles to find out information, not to find out commandments for action. Many people go to the oracles to find out who is right, not how to make peace and harmony. Of course, it is just not simply who is right, but I am right. Or am I right? Right, but am I right? In which case, I bring the reading to you, and if I'm wrong, I hide it. This is real talk, right? People go to the deities for something, I've been in relationships and have relationships with folks, societal folks, and, this is what we do, you know what I mean? This is it's funny. Comedy. In which case, I might bring the oracle to you, and if I'm wrong, I hide it. Many people go to the deities for something, but do not give up the lower part of themselves. You go for something instead of for spiritual growth. Don't forget that while you might see the deity as a source of babies and marriages and jobs, etc., the deities see you as the lead or lead that must be transmuted into gold. That's deep. Question: please clarify if furthers one. Please question if it furthers one to influence as the guest of a king. See, it's not a clear. I don't like the way this is written like this. See, because I'm reading, but I don't have a clear understanding of what the question was. Right? So, answer. It says he should be, so to speak, a guest. That is, he should be honored and allowed to act independently. That's what it means. It furthers one to exert influence as a guest of the king is contradicted by the explanation, which is really that he is honored and should be allowed to act independently and should not be used as a tool. Meaning, how do you treat guests? If you are righteous, you treat guests in an honorable way with respect. So when you come to someone for counsel, then you treat that person with respect. You honor them. You treat them like you would treat a guest. That is very important because many of you will treat a guest better than you treat your counselors from the oracles, or your counsels from the oracles. Okay? Question, or I should say answer. Answer to a classroom question regarding receiving this reading on another person's actions. Okay? With such generality from what you have just given me, I would say that perhaps the person was right in what they said to you. In this case, the reading will lend itself to saying that the person has counseled you properly, given you good advice, respected on the highest level of abstraction. Respected on the highest level of abstraction. All right. Don't forget that the technique of using the oracle is to be able to abstract the reading to a certain level that you can apply it to any situation. Okay. When we say meditate on your reading, we are saying abstract it to the level that it can be applied to all situations. Meaning that in the fourth line, the minister, the occultist, the priest is the kind of person who is most likely to have the insight that the fourth line is speaking about. Meaning that in given examples, certain principles, the I Ching would use this type of person or use this type. Who is the type of person that could identify with having this kind of insight? Who? A priest, an occultist, a scientist. But it doesn't mean that non-initiated, even a baby, at one point or another, could give you information that the oracles might say to you or describe to the fourth line, in which the oracles is not saying that the child is a sage or has the light or whatever, but at the time, the information that you got was on the money. Okay. Now he's speaking about the fifth line before we actually go into the fifth line. He says, the fifth line is usually typified as the king, but abstracted, it could mean the ego center within you. It could mean anyone who is manifesting those qualities at the moment, even though they may not tend to manifest that in general. All right? That the type of particular principle is one who will manifest those qualities all the time or in most cases. Okay. All right. Now to the text. Fifth line in the fifth, 9 in the fifth place. Contemplation of my life. The superior man is without blame. A man in an authoritative position to whom others look up to must always be ready for self-examination. The right sort of self-examination, however, consists in not idly brooding over oneself, but in examining one's effects one produces. Only when these effects are good and when one's influence on others is good, will the contemplation of one's life bring satisfaction of knowing oneself to be free of mistakes. All right, back to Shechem. Again, you might need the assistance, and you ought to invoke the assistance of the oracles to gain insight into the effects that your actions produce within the world. It says a man in an authoritative position. That is the type, but it could be you, because in many respects you are an example. It says to whom others look up to, meaning that somebody who serves as an exemplary of certain values, which is not only kings do or priests do, but everybody to some degree is an exemplary to somebody else. Everybody to some degree is a force, a condition of force upon others. You influence other, you exert that should be others, right? You influence others, you exert influence upon others' behavior. If two of you begin to talk street man, bathroom talk to one another, you are going to have a negative influence on each other. In a situation like that, you would draw this line, for instance, even though you are not necessarily an authoritative position, but you do exert influence upon somebody else. Why? Because in the scheme of relativity, the person that you are talking to is receptive to you. Who is in authority, who is in submission could just simply be a question of who is receptive to who. Is that clear? So he's saying even though it's talking about the king, many times it's talking about you and the effect that you're having on others that you talk to, who are respecting what you're saying as people would respect the king, etc., etc. Right? Is that clear to you? Is that clear to you? Meaning that the oracle says a man in an authoritative position, usually that is the king, the president, the priest, etc. With such people, you are automatically, psychologically placed in a receptive state to them. So it is important that that person who is in an authoritative position be very mindful of the effects he produces upon others. But friends who are peers on an external level also are receptive in influencing relationships to one another. Some people are receptive to others. Some people influence others as opposed to being influenced by others. Some people are of the nature that they observe the influence of other people around them, even though on the social level you are peer members. So when you get this line, you need not be a sage or a king or a priest or whatever. in relationship to somebody else or some other group of people or whatever, you are influential, spiritually speaking. If not socially or officially, you are spiritually. So you must ask the oracle, comment on the influence that I produce upon XYZ. And the oracle will say if that influence is bad or good or whatever. This is another line where you need to go to the oracles and get the objective insight into the effects you are producing. Leave it up to you and Sebek will get in the way. Question. Do you ask again if this is the second hexagram? Answer. Meaning the hexagram created by a stress line in the first hexagram, right? You get hexagram 21 and then you stress, you get the 20 in the second as the second hexagram. That was the person's example. If this is the second hexagram, let's say if the first reading is inauspicious, then it will mean that your perception is incorrect. You may go to the oracle if from your meditation on the reading you see or feel that these things might work or might be at work. You have to work with it. All right? All right, I'm going to go back because I flubbed that, right? Let's see. Answer, if this is the second hexagram, let's say if the reading is inauspicious, then it will mean that your perception is incorrect. You may go to the oracles if from your meditation on the reading you see or feel that these things might be at work. You have to work with it. All right, question. If you get the 20th hexagram straight up, you ask again, answer again or again. When you get the hexagram straight up or as a second hexagram, you need to meditate on all of the lines, even though you haven't been given any one of them or any, there's a hole there, any of them. Again, you might see that something might apply, in which case you will take care of it. All right. 6 at the top, back to the text. Or I should say not line 6, 9 at the top. Contemplation of his life. The superior man is without blame. While the preceding line represents a man who contemplates himself, back to Shechem, to see what effects he has on others, back to the text. Here, in the highest place, everything that is personal related to the ego is excluded. The picture is that of a sage who stands outside the affairs of the world. Liberated from his ego, he contemplates the laws of life and so realizes that knowing how to become free of blame is the highest good. Back to the Shechem. This is a very botched up line. The preceding line, as the 2 lines before that, speak of contemplating to see what effects you have on others. That is also going beyond your ego. That is no longer thinking about you, but the effect you have on others. This line said that one does not just think about the effects that one has upon others. Now one is contemplating the cosmogonical relationships, the cosmogonical laws of life, the cosmogonical principles of life, which go beyond relationships of cause and effect. All right? Okay. What I'm saying is that on one hand, it is legitimate for me to think in terms of how I am influencing you, etc. That's on one level. When you get the 5th line, the oracle is accepting the relativity, the relative boundaries or dimension of relativity in life. This is a very tough nut to get over, and I want to get it across to you well. In the top line, the oracle is going beyond relativity. For example, on the 5th line side, we could talk about the brutality of war, the bad effects that war has upon the lives of people. But in the top line, we go beyond the brutality and misery. what are these things but the conditioned states of the spirit? The top line brings up the initiation of Arjuna, for example, when he says, I can't fight against these people. They are my blood relatives. So Krishna takes him beyond these relations. He says the man never dies. It is not the man who is going to die. The top line goes beyond the mundane, everyday relativity. It does not say absolutely that relativity has no value. Only in this line, in this hexagram, you are being told to transcend the relativity. But when you get the fifth line or the third line, you must think of the relative effects. They have validity then. If I hurt you, you did something and I hurt you, within that framework, it is valid. When you get this top line of the 20th hexagram, the oracle is saying, what is hurt? If you liberate yourself beyond, back to your true self, there will be no such thing as hurt. Getting this stuff is deep. I really love how, we can talk on the one hand, Kemetic words, right, and Kemetic concepts, and we can marry them to Yoruba concepts, and then we can go over here and speak about ancient Indian, Hindu, or Vedic concepts, things like this. This is where we see the whole of what God is, right? God is where you can look at the similarities of the principle throughout the different religions. Where the concept over here links up with the concept over here. That's when you find a divinity. People are stressing about what religion, and only my religion and stuff like that. No, if your religion is the only religion that's talking about what it's talking about, then it's probably not the truth, There is truth when you have a religion that's on the one side of the world, and then on the 180, you have similar truths. That's where you can see some truth. That means that God showed these people something and then showed these people the same thing. And they both said it, and then they came together thousands of years later and you say, oh yeah, this concept is like our concept of this. That's God. That's, the oneness of, what spirituality is. All right. But that ain't talking about nothing about what he was talking about. This is deep stuff, right? Talking about getting beyond the relativity of your person, to contemplate things from the larger aspect, right? That thing about who's hurt. Oh man, you're only hurt because of the ego. When you drop the ego, then you're not even hurting no more. It's like, wow, that hurt. That really hurt. It only hurt because I'm holding on to that thing that I have identified as, yeah, that's me. I don't take that. That's not what I do. I'm this, I'm that. But when you drop that, it's like, what's hurt? There's nothing hurt, There's no pain. All right, look, I'm going to trip on that another time. All right, home stretch. Back, we're still talking, Shekham's still talking. He says, so an elder in an African society is one who is almost an ancestor already. You have a rich experience to back up the traditional lore about spirituality, etc. to the young people. Western elders, all they do is play bingo and try to recapture their youth. That is not correct. Those are the things that you have to understand, that there is a law higher than the day-to-day cause and effects. There is a law higher than the day-to-day cause and effects. All right. There is a place for the day-to-day cause and effects. But when you get this line, the oracles is saying to you, get on the horse of Pegasus and go beyond the everyday casual relationships between things. Even the Greek, Pegasus, right? Good stuff, right? Question regarding what you have to do to perform well on your job, and you got this line. Answer, it is very plain what it is saying. It is saying, don't get a job as a job. You have to go beyond that. It is no longer a job. you have to see that it is now a vehicle of something much higher. It is saying that the thing that you are looking, you can know, looking at, I'm thinking, you can no longer see through old eyes. You have to see from transcendental point of view. Question, general theme of this hexagram. Answer, general theme of this hexagram is your perception. Thinking begins with perception. Thinking is not working with this, or not, thinking is working with that which you have seen, or working upon that which you have seen. Right? Okay, that's what thinking is, right? Thinking is reworking what you have seen, what you know. Okay, that's what he's saying. So before you can think, you have to first have a view of something. The hexagram goes on to give you guidance on how to first get a clear and correct view of something, which should not be approached matter-of-factly, but ritualistically. And it shows you that then your perception of things, your Sebek nature tends to get in the way. Because Sebek, who is segregative, biased towards your own person, tends to relate everything towards your own self. That's where the Sebek part comes in the sense that when you are trying to see something, it is only not what you see, but how you relate it, or how you relate it. Yeah, not only what you see, but how you relate it. Do you see it from your own point of view, how it affects you? Do you see it from your own ideas? So the oracle says to you that you have to strip yourself of your own ego-centeredness. You have to strip yourself of your own biases, and then you also have to see that there is a relative view of life and an absolute view of life. End lecture. That's a deep one, man. That one there is one you sit with your highlighter pen, man, and, you go to town and you meditate on it. This is deep stuff, man. This is, I'm telling you, this text is invaluable, and I hope if other, races who are other than melanated folks or whatever are watching, I hope you guys are watching, and I hope that you can get beyond, certain things where, you may be Chinese, and then, he says something about Chinese chauvinism. Try and see past that a little bit and just, acknowledge some of the things that he's saying. Because, lots of times it's true. It's like, there have been throughout history a chauvinistic, view that people have had, and put on other people in society. So it's not necessarily, he may be blunt, but he's speaking to his people. He's not necessarily speaking to an audience of all people. He's talking to his folk. You know what I mean? So sometimes we kind of we don't take off the gloves, and we speak real when we are with our folks. But these are still, this is ageless wisdom. This is stuff that, if you see it and if you, apply it to life, you can get a lot of richness out of your experiences. So, that's why I do this, man. And I hope you guys are accepting it. You know what I mean? I hope y'all are getting it. So, yeah, we are almost at 1/3 of our mission here. You know what I'm saying? So we're going to keep it going next time. All right, y'all. Peace and love.